So, it's good to be here. I know you came for the pizza, but you will pay a high price because you'll have to hear me speak in order to get your pizza. As Bill mentioned, I did found 1,000 Friends Wisconsin. That organization is going great. It actually flourished after I left. I'm happy to say the same is true for the city of Madison. I was mayor there for 8 years, and now I do some private consulting, but my main job is that I run the Wisconsin Bicycle Federation. I've been doing that about a year or so. I'm well familiar with Milwaukee. I grew up in West Dallas, went to Thomas More High School with my good friend Mike Meyerly, who's here, and actually went to UW for 2 years, but scrubbed out here and ended up at UW-Madison, obviously an inferior institution. So we're going to talk a little bit about how better biking builds better cities. And just some quick background to start on the Bike Fed. 4,500 members. We're actually the largest statewide bicycle advocacy organization in the country. We're about 26 years old, and we have offices in Milwaukee and Madison. In fact, our Milwaukee office is our main office. And we do public education and advocacy. So we teach thousands of kids a year how to bike safely. We have a program to reach out to adults called Share and Be Aware, again, to teach them how to bike safely and to raise awareness among both cyclists and drivers about how to be safe around one another. And we do some advocacy in Madison and at the local level. Our main program we call America's Best Ride. It has 4 components. One, for those of you who like to road ride, we want to create an interstate bicycle trail network, just like our state highway network. We're hard at work planning that together with the DNR and the DOT. For those of you who might like mountain biking, we want to create a mountain biking center someplace in Wisconsin. There are these centers now in Copper Harbor, Michigan, and in Minnesota, places where you can go to ride several different trails. And in general, we want to increase mountain biking opportunities for people. And the Bicycle Friendly Communities Program, many of you may know about this. It's run by the League of American Bicyclists, and it rates cities platinum, gold, silver, bronze. There are about a dozen cities in Wisconsin on that list. Most of them are bronze. Milwaukee is bronze. It just recently got its bronze rating again. La Crosse is silver. Madison is gold. And so one of the things we want to do is get more cities on that list and then move cities up the list. And right now we rank, we did a numeric ranking. We rank 5th in the country in terms of number of cities on the list and their relative placement on the list. And we would hope to be 2nd or 1st within the next few years. So that's a program of ours. And just a statistic on that. We have 118% growth in bike commuting since 2000. And that's really the part of our work that I want to talk about today. Road biking is terrific and mountain biking is wonderful, but I really want to talk about bicycles as they relate to cities and primarily bicycle commuting. And the last part of our work is also something I want to touch on today, and that's bikes for everyone. So the Bike Fed has always been an organization that helps folks who are already excited, enthused about biking, whatever kind of cycling that might be. But one of the things that I added when I became director is this idea of building the pie, reaching out to folks who aren't biking right now. Maybe they never learned how to ride a bike. Maybe they have a bike, but they don't use it. And to really think of the bike as a vehicle for social change. So we've added that as a 4th item to our agenda. This is a survey some of you may have seen. It gets a lot of use. It's a survey that comes out of Portland. Portland is part of the United States. Sometimes people think Portland, Boulder, Madison, you know, not really part of the United States, but it is. And although there are reasons to think not, having been mayor of one of those cities, but I understand why people would think that. But in any event, I think this does hold up pretty well nationally, even though it does come out of Portland. And what the survey says was that 7% of Portlanders are intrepid cyclists, right? They are strong, they are invincible, they will cycle anywhere. 30% 33% won't get on a bicycle to save their lives. They're not interested. But 60% are interested but concerned. In other words, they're interested in riding a bicycle, but they're concerned, and what they're concerned about is for their safety. And so in our view, if you can create safe infrastructure for people to ride a bike, a whole lot more people are going to ride. There's tremendous potential for people to get on a bike if they feel safe. So I'd like to hit 4 points today. First of all, any form of transportation shapes a city. And I want to talk specifically about how bikes might shape a city. Secondly, bikes, I believe, are the ideal form of transportation for a city. Third, it's not just about the physical design of a city. It's the bikes mean social mobility. And fourth, bikes are like canaries in a coal mine. If you build a place that's good for bikes and pedestrians, almost by definition, you're building a place that has a high quality of life. When I was mayor, I really pushed bicycling policies. We got the gold rating. We created a committee to get us to platinum. And that wasn't just because I liked to ride a bike. It was because I believed that everything that we did to try to make our community better and safer for cycling was also increasing the overall quality of life in the city. And I won't talk about it too much in this presentation, but I also viewed it as marketing the city. I know people in Madison who moved there because we were a gold city on the bicycle-friendly communities list. It was one indication of quality of life for a very mobile, talented workforce that can live anywhere. One of the things they look at is that bicycle-friendly communities rating. So one of the ways I would sell this to the business community was to say, look, this isn't just about biking. Bike's almost irrelevant. It's about marketing the city and our overall quality of life. So transportation shapes the city. This is actually a picture of Freiburg, Germany. It's one of Madison's sister cities. It's about the same size as Madison, a little over 200,000. Got a big university, 40,000 students. But what it has that a community like Madison does not have is a great streetcar system, public transportation system. Actually, the downtown of Freiburg is a car-free zone and has been since the 1970s. And as you can see, it's just tremendously vibrant. So that streetcar system has really shaped Freiburg. It was a standard car-dependent city in the early 1970s, but they committed themselves to this form of transportation, and it's also very friendly for bicycles. And they've really created a very vibrant downtown and actually some very vibrant neighborhoods. They created a brand new neighborhood called Vauban, which is car-free and served to the downtown by the streetcar system. So my point is that any kind of transportation that you select to emphasize will help shape your city. Now these are some very high-tech graphics that I created all by myself. And I'm sure that you're all fooled by that because they're so well done. But so here's the idea. I wanted to compare the transportation technology to the amount of land that's potentially reachable and open to development based on the transportation technology. So the first is the horse car city, 1850 to about 1890 in America. And if you think that an average commute or the longest comfortable commute might be, say, half an hour, based on the average speed of a horse car, you go out from the center of the town, and somehow I got to the wrong one here. You go out to the center of town, and you can calculate the amount of acres that are developable, that are reachable in a half an hour under that technology. It turns out to be 12,500 acres. So the next step would be the streetcar city. Electric streetcars took over about 1890. Within really 10 years or so, almost every significant city in our country had electric streetcars. It was a technology that took off. And they can go faster. They can go about 15 miles an hour. So in half an hour, you can get 7.5 miles out from the center. And the theoretical developable acres are about 226,000. Now, of course, it's theoretical, right? There's no lake, there's no river, there's no mountains. But it gives you a comparison of how the transportation system affects land use. Watch what happens when you add cars, though. So when you add cars, 30 minutes out at 60 miles an hour will get you this, 3.6 million acres, potentially developable, reachable easily within a half hour when you combine cars and freeways. And that really explains, I think, what happened in the United States in the 1950s and 60s and 70s once we built high-speed freeway systems and the sprawl that came because of it. So you can see they're sort of poor graphics, but I think they kind of tell the tale of how a transportation system affects development on a macro scale. But it also affects development on a micro scale as well. So this is this is a same section of Buffalo, New York, during the summer, so it's not just white. This is 1902, this is 2012. And you can see that there's a lot going on here in 1902, right? You've got the good grid street pattern. You've got all of this value, right? That's nothing but value. Buildings, mixed uses, you can imagine lots of people on those streets. There is a transportation network here. It's a rail yard. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of interesting spaces, and a lot of value. And the same section in 2012 basically has no value. There's probably little or no property tax value in this section now. This is obviously a tax-exempt use. These large surface parking lots, if they have any value at all, are very low. So it's really providing nothing to the city in the way of revenue, and it's not providing much of anything to the city in the way of quality of life. These are single-use facilities, right? You can't build a building along it. You can't walk on it. You can't ride a bike on it. It's there to drive on and nothing else. And this landscape, of course, is kind of a moonscape, right? So it's a heat island. It's got runoff issues. There's really nothing about it that adds much to the city at all. And in fact, it takes something away because people can drive in and drive out and never have to interact with the city at all. So the difference between the value of this in so many different ways and the value of this is really striking. You don't build this if you really care about the city. You might build it if you want folks to come in from the suburbs, do their job, maybe go to a ball game and leave. But this isn't built for the city. It's built for essentially the suburbs. So the first point is bikes, the kind of transportation technology that you have does shape a city. The second point is I want to make a case for bikes being the ideal transportation technology. So this is a picture from Munster, Germany, where they have kind of a bike belt line. It's literally a belt that goes around the city, and it's used for bicycle commuting in Munster, and it's packed. So we did a tour of bicycle facilities when I was mayor in Europe. There was no sacrifice too big for me when I was mayor of Madison. So I went to Munster, I went to Amsterdam and Utrecht and other places because I would do anything for my city. So when we were in Munster, there were like 12 of us on the trip. And it is you can't experience anything like this anywhere in the United States. You go to even Portland, nothing's like it. It's just this sea of bicycles. And they're kind of like fish. They kind of just sort of know, where to go. Nobody wears a helmet. So we rented bicycles. And all of the bicycles in Munster that are rentals are yellow. And but you get into the sea and you become a little bit hesitant. It takes you a while before you kind of get into the flow of it. And so one of the members of our group who spoke German overheard someone on the belt line here call us the yellow danger. So we still have reunion meetings, and we call ourselves the yellow danger, and we get together and talk about stuff. So this is Amsterdam, so Bakfiets, obviously showing how practical a bicycle can be, and then just how nice a bicycle can be. So really, I think this explains it, and I don't really need to say anything else, right? Because you can just read this and just get it, right? Basically, What this says is that the bicycle is the most efficient form of transportation ever invented. And here's some comparisons. These are relative efficiencies. So gasoline car engine is less than 2% efficient, a hybrid bus about 6, electric rail motor about 9. The bicycle is about 80% efficient. And I'm not a physicist, so I'm not capable of explaining this in great detail, but I do think of it this way. When I drive my car to work, which is about 2.5 miles, I don't know, my car might weigh 2,000 pounds, something like that. I weigh 180. So almost all of the energy that the car is using to transport me the 2.5 miles to my office isn't in moving me, it's in moving the car. When I get on my bike, which is 24 pounds, something like that, all of my energy is really moving me and very little moving the bike. I think that's the simplest way to look at it. And so it's really using the appropriate technology for the task at hand. I didn't ride my bike here from Madison today, right? I needed to get here more quickly. It's a little chilly out. So it was an appropriate technology for me to drive or take the bus. But it's not really an appropriate technology for me to drive from my house on the west side of Madison to my office 2.5 miles away. I bike most days. And again, you know, when the weather's inclement or whatever, I'll drive or I'll take the bus. But it's just such a efficient way to get around for certain trips. But keep in mind that the vast majority of trips in the United States are short and very doable by bike. And so if we can get more folks to get on their bikes, they're using the most efficient form of transportation known to man. They're using less fossil fuels. They're helping keep themselves in shape. We all know that obesity is an epidemic in this country. And they're contributing to the quality of life in the city. This is a parking facility in Amsterdam. It parks 10,000 bicycles, and it's not enough. It is packed, and as you can see, there's bicycles parked around it. This is next to the train station in Amsterdam. This is a parking facility in Madison, about the same size, and it parks 500 cars. The city is now considering, this is at the end of its useful life. It's 50-some years old. We all know that when we get to 50-some years old, we're at the end of our useful lives. Well, we hope not. Anyway, it's got to come down. It's got to come down. It should, if we do the right thing, we'll take this and we'll put the parking underground. Well, if we do the right thing, we won't replace it, but I'm a little radical in that respect, and so I know the city is going to replace it. But if you put it underground, it'll be $44,000 a stall. Put it underground. And the city would actually like to more than double it. They want to put in 3 trays, 1,200 cars. So instead of 500, 1,200. Underground at $44,000 a space. I don't think that's a very smart investment for a whole bunch of reasons. But you can see, you park 10,000 bikes here I don't know, that facility I'm sure costs much less than a parking ramp. Obviously, it doesn't need the same sort of infrastructure. This will cost, you can do the math, 44,000 times 1,200. Does that make any sense? And of course, if you can save some money by leaving it above ground, but if you do that, then look at the wasted space you have, right? That's absolutely dead space walking by it, contributes nothing to the streetscape, and contributes a far, well, this is actually tax exempt because it's city owned, but even if it were privately owned, that's going to contribute a lot less to your tax base than, some good ground level retail and some housing or offices above it. So either way, it's a loser. It's a dead spot for a city. This fellow named Norman Garrick, professor of civil engineering at UConn, he's done a recent study that says for some cities, they forfeit more than $1,000 per parking space per year in potential revenues. So it's really a bad investment. Parking is really a terrible investment for a city. We did a study back when I was at 1,000 Friends, and we compared Camp Randall, where the Badgers win football games, and Miller Park, where the Brewers choke in September. And they're totally different facilities, right? Miller Park has this huge parking lot. I think it parks 14,000 cars. And it seats like 45,000. Camp Randall seats almost 100,000, and there's like 80 parking stalls. Seriously, that's all there is. And so what do people do at Camp Randall? Well, they park all over the place, right? They park in facilities all over campus. In my neighborhood, I live about a mile from here. People park cars on their front lawns at 15 bucks a throw. The Boy Scouts earn some money by parking at the Queen of Peace parking lot. So the parking's like all over the place. And when the game ends, people diffuse just all over the place. And it's actually quite easy to get out and around because people are coming from all kinds of different nodes. Plus, it's pretty pleasant to walk out at Camp Randall. You might decide there are opportunities to have a cocktail there. And you might decide to stop for a cocktail. Sometimes people do after a Badger game. I don't encourage it, but it happens. You walk out of Miller Park, and you're in the sun, and it's hotter than heck, and you're on the pavement, and you got to find your car, and then what happens? You sit in the parking lot for a long time, and a rather frustrating experience, too, because you got all this parking here, and you've only got like 3 or 4 ways out of that stadium. And so it's really a very inefficient way for people to park. And by the way, if you park at the edge of this, you're walking probably farther than a lot of these people are walking to get to the parking that they have scattered around all over the place. Anyway, so we compared the two facilities, and we said, well, what if we took the footprint of the Miller Park parking lot and we put it around Camp Randall, and there's all this neighborhood stuff and a business district here. What would that mean for the city tax base? Well, we lose $50 million. This study was done back in the late 90s, so the number's bigger now. But we figured we'd lose $50 million in tax base if all of this, and this is Mickey's Dairy Bar, and there's a bike path here, and if all this stuff was removed to have this parking lot, there'd be $50 million in tax base that you would lose. Plus, you'd have this big heat island. There's lots of trees there now. You'd have this huge heat island. You'd have runoff into our lakes. Aesthetically, obviously, it would be ugly. And there's nothing you could do with it. Camp Randall gets used, 6 or 7 times a year for the Badgers, and then there's high school playoffs and a few other things. I would bet 20 days out of the year, maybe, Camp Randall is used. The other 345, this would be absolutely wasted space. And it's not that much better for Miller Park, right? The Brewers play 81 games at home, and there are some other events around the year. But right now, I guarantee you, there's absolutely dead space. There's, Fridays in there, but that's about it. So it's not generating value. It's not generating wealth. It's just sitting there. And so we asked ourselves, well, what if, so we have the East Town and West Town parking lots. They're huge. What if just 10% of it was developed? And the results, again, based on the mill rates at the time, were that the city of Madison would get $835,000. The school district would get $1.25 million if you developed just 10% of those parking lots. You probably know the story of the Embarcadero in San Francisco. An earthquake brought it down. It had been built in 1958, and the city, after a long discussion, decided not to build this double-decker freeway. Progressive cities and progressive states are tearing down double-decker freeways, not building them. Pointed comment. This is insane to build today. Nobody would build this today, except the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. It came down, and the property values tripled in the Embarcadero. It opened up that part of the city to the bay. And if you go there, it's this really pleasant place to be, right? They got a streetcar system and a boulevard and all this public art. It's a pleasant place to be. This is absolutely unusable unless you're in a car. So it adds to the city, and it adds to the bottom line. Okay, point number 3, bikes are vehicles for social change. Francis Willard actually said that the bicycle was the leading means of emancipating women in the 1890s. It gave women the opportunity to be literally mobile. They weren't dependent on their husbands to get around. And it was such a threat to the social order that there's this cartoon from Puck magazine. You see the woman, she's about to go out, she's got her bloomers and everything, she's about to go out. The bicycle sort of sits here ominously, peeking behind her husband, and her husband is stuck actually taking care of his kids. This bicycle is obviously a threat to the social order and will destroy the American family, which we know it did. So for a long time, the bicycle has been thought of that way. But here's the bottom line. The annual cost of operation for a car in the United States is $8,200. And the average cost of a bicycle is $308. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what anybody spends $308 on a bicycle. I suppose, I figured it out. I have a fleet of 5, and I did spend about $500 or $600. But I bought a new Saris rack, and I bought a new pair of biking shoes, and I bought a pair of biking shorts. So if you just look at what I actually spent on bicycle maintenance, I bought a new pair of brake shoes and replaced a couple of tires, probably $100 on 5 bikes. So the bicycle can be literally free. It can be literally free to own. There are places where you can get a free bicycle. And if you'll teach yourself just a little bit of bike maintenance, it can be absolutely free to operate. The average car will cost you $8,200. This is a map I bet the planners are familiar with. It comes from the Center on Neighborhood Technologies in Chicago. They do these studies. And what they like to do, and you can find these maps for any metro area in the United States right on their website. And Scott Bernstein down there pioneered this. He's been doing it for years. But basically, what he's trying to show is that, what we know, which is that it used to be that housing was by far the most expensive thing in a household budget. And transportation was a distant second. But now transportation is catching up. It's almost as expensive as housing. And what people tend to do, there's this saying in real estate, drive till you qualify, right? Keep driving until you can afford the real estate. But of course, that doesn't take into account the cost of the driving. And so what you see on the left here is this drive to qualify view of the world, which doesn't take into account transportation costs. And what it shows you is, hey, I can get a great deal in Slinger, or Iron Ridge or someplace like that. But when you add the transportation costs to the equation, you can see all those places are expensive to live, and really the best values are close in the inner city, once you take into account transportation and housing. And so these neighborhoods, which are some of the poorest in Wisconsin, also have some of the greatest potential to save people money. If a family can get away without one car, it's saving somewhere around $8,000 a year. And the Bike Fed has a commitment to that. We have our offices on 36th and Pierce right there. And so we're trying to kind of use the bike as a way, in a small way, of redeveloping that neighborhood. This is called the UW-Milwaukee building. So it's not just the Bike Fed, but there's fixation bicycles in there. They build really cool custom-made bikes. And Tom Schuler, who runs the Tour of America's Dairyland, has his offices in there. He actually owns the building. And it's right here next to Hank Aaron, the Hank Aaron Trail. This was, I think, the opening of it. It's a big deal in Milwaukee when the racing sausages show up for something. And this is a view of the whole block. So this is our building, the building we're in. This building here is the Urban Ecology Center, a recent investment. Actually, the Burke family who owns Trek. You may have heard of the Burke family. They've been in the news recently. They contributed the money to build that. So that's got a bicycle connection. This building in the middle between us and the Ecology Center has just been purchased. It's going to be a school. And this building has been purchased and it's being rehabbed on spec. So someone believes, they're betting on the neighborhood. They believe this building is going to be used for something. So we like to think that bicycles are playing a role in the redevelopment of the Menominee River Valley. And so the point is that too often I think when we think about cyclists, we think about these guys, right? In fact, the average Bike Fed member is a 50-something white guy who rides a road bike, makes about $90,000 a year. These are my brothers. This is me, right? And that's fine. I have nothing against me. I like myself. I don't want to lose any of those guys. But as long as that's the image of the cyclist, we're not going to go over so well, right? Because this is the 7%. This is the intrepid. These are the folks. It's not a sympathetic figure, right? And when you hear the silliness on, call-in radio shows and all that stuff, that's what they're talking about, right? That's the image of the cyclist that a lot of people have in their heads. If we can get this to be the image of a cyclist, or the image, on the brochures I handed out, take a look at that image, right? We spent a lot of time thinking about the image we wanted on the cover. And some of the folks in the bike fed sort of wanted the typical lycra guy. And I said, no, it's really got to be kind of that, right? So it's a middle-aged woman, right? She looks like somebody's mom, right? How can you not love her? And so one of the things we want to do is sort of change that image of the cyclist away from the lycra-clad guy with the helmet and the $5,000 bike to a mother on her bike with her kids, getting the groceries, doing whatever. Or a young kid. Fourth point, bikes are like canaries in a coal mine. So I mentioned that I did the sacrifice of this trip to Europe to look at bicycle facilities. The sacrifice became even greater because it was in the spring of 2010. And if you think back to the spring of 2010, there was a big volcano in, I can't remember if it was Greenland or Iceland. Iceland. So at the end of this trip, just as we were about to head home, we were in Amsterdam, and the volcano happened, and it stopped all of the airline flights. I was trapped in Amsterdam. What do you do in Amsterdam? So to console myself, I found this little cafe, not too hard to find in Amsterdam, and put myself there and set up shop and drank those little cups of strong coffee and croissant and stuff like that, and did some reading and continued to sacrifice on behalf of the people of Madison for 4 days until sadly they figured out how to get us home. But the point, and the bikes, of course, bikes are everywhere in Amsterdam, right? But the point is that that I think any of us would identify as a very healthy urban scene. And the Netherlands leads the world in bicycle ownership per capita. I don't think it's by accident that you create these wonderful places where people just want to be, right? And where they enjoy life and enjoy mixing it up with other folks. That's the definition of a city, right? That's why a city's not a suburb. I don't have anything against suburbs, but cities are a whole lot more interesting. When you got 8 million people close together in New York, you've got, what, 500,000 here in Milwaukee, close together, all kinds of interesting things are going to happen. People are going to run into each other. Professors of history will run into professors of English, will run into professors of geography. You get this wonderful, crazy quilt. No, but you got people who are engineers and artists and folks from all different walks of life, and they mix it up in a city and they create these really interesting places. They open restaurants and bars and they create new apps and all kinds of stuff. That's what makes a city an interesting place to be. And the bicycle plays a role in that because it's the form of transportation that aids in that kind of development. So this is no accident. This is in part, and not entirely, but in part, it is a product of the bicycle. The ability to sit there and sort of watch the world go by in Amsterdam is in part a product of the bicycle. And we also know that biking makes us happy. We can prove this. So there is something called the World Happiness Report. This actually exists. Actually, it's from the United Nations. And actually, there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff going on about that, which you probably know about. But it's getting away from this idea of GDP, right? Because gross domestic product, this is a great quote from Bobby Kennedy about it, but the gross domestic product measures everything, right? It measures creation of nuclear weapons and investments in prisons, right? And all this stuff that doesn't really lead to our happiness. And so the idea is, and I think this started in Britain, to try to define and quantify gross domestic happiness. Because the idea is gross domestic product is measuring something that isn't really all that important. So it actually is a serious discussion. Anyway, so these are the top 5 happiest countries. And this is the per capita ranking for bike ownership. So Denmark is said to be the happiest country. Second, Norway's second happiest country, they say. Actually married a Norwegian, I'd say that's probably true. Fifth, Switzerland. Third, they're the eighth highest. And the Netherlands, the fourth happiest country by the matrix, they're the first, and then Sweden. And there's another way, there's another index called the Quality of Life Index. And again, if you look at those countries, the quality of, and this is redoing it by bikes per capita, and then they're all high on the list, they're all in the top 10. Not, I know that's not academically rigorous, but I think there is something to be said for the connection between the quality of life that you get when you build your communities around cycling and the happiness people have for living in that community. This is a book some of you may know about. It's called Happy City by a fellow named Charles Montgomery. And he's got references to cyclists and bicycling all over that book. But here he's talking about the health benefits of cycling and just your awareness of your community when you're on a bicycle. And the question is, where are you happier? Are you happier at the Marquette Interchange? Or would you be happier in Freiburg, right? Sitting there at that cafe? My guess is you'd be happier at the cafe, but I don't want to be presumptuous. So the outlook. Driving's not cool anymore. And what we see is there was a steady increase in vehicle miles traveled until about 2000. And then the road builders would want to tell you, yeah, but then the recession happened. And that's why VMT went down. But the truth is, it hasn't gone back up. It's been flat since the recession. And I think there's a lot behind that. But the truth is, when you see projections that the DOT uses or the federal US DOT uses, they have lines that keep going like this, as if this never happened. And then every year they make a new projection, it keeps going like this, even though you would think the projection might be like that. So we still have a lot to get over politically. But the truth is, it doesn't look like VMT is growing and will soon. It's a new report that just came out. Today, almost 60% of households own 2 or more vehicles. The projection is in 20 years, it'll be much below 50%. When I was a 18-year-old in 1977, 8% of us, fellow 18-year-olds, did not have driver's license, and they were probably in jail. Yeah, Marley might have been one of them. I don't know. He's always a rebel. But today, it's 3 times as many don't have driver's license because it isn't the same rite of passage that it used to be. It doesn't mean as much culturally, socially to millennials as it did to us. And the average cost of a car is $31,000, a new car, and it depreciates 11% the moment you drive it off the lot. The average graduate leaves college with a $25,000 debt, and we know a lot of people who have 6-figure debts, right? So one great way to get around that is to not own a car, not own 2 cars. There are 77 million of us in the baby boom generation, about maybe half of this room as I look around. And I got news for you, we're not getting any younger. And as we age, we're not going to want to drive so much, or maybe we shouldn't drive so much. There's evidence that we're starting to move back into cities where we have amenities, theaters and medical facilities and all that stuff, and places where we can walk and bike, because driving is no longer as appealing the older you get. And so at both ends of the spectrum, baby boomers, millennials, there's more interest in alternatives to driving. And the final thought is that bikes are about freedom. Bikes mean freedom. What I try to emphasize, sometimes folks who don't like bikes will kind of portray it as if we're trying to make them mandatory. Literally, you will hear people say they're trying to take away my car, which is a ridiculous thought. I mean, nobody is trying to take away your car. What we're trying to create is more of an even playing field. If you think about what we've done in the last 100 years or so in terms of roads and highways, we spent billions and billions of dollars trying to make them safer with some effect. Roads are safer, and it's a justification for building a lot more highways sometimes. Well, our thought is, why not do the same for bicycles? Why not create the same sort of facilities, that make biking safer at a fraction of a cost of the billions that we spent on roads. It's not about being anti-car, it's about giving people the freedom of choice. 60% of people are interested in biking more if they felt safe. And so I just want to leave you with this. This is a picture I took. It's part of a different talk I give, but it's a picture I took in front of my grandparents' house. They lived on 31st and Rogers on the south side. And this neighborhood was built in the 20s. And this is really about freedom of transportation choice. Because as a pedestrian, you know, you can say you can walk someplace, but if it's not pleasant, if you don't have a meaningful destination, then that's just theoretical. So in this neighborhood, built in the 20s, obviously it's a great place to walk, right? You got a sidewalk, you've got this nice tree canopy, you've got this interaction between the private space of the home and the public space of the street. These porches give you an opportunity to talk to your neighbor if you want. This is called SEPTED. Some of you probably know about it. These days, if we were to recreate it, it's basically creating a safer neighborhood through urban design. So the fact that you've got eyes on the street, make this a safer street. You got a meaningful destination. In my grandparents' day, that was a butcher shop and grocery store they could walk to. Great place to be a pedestrian. Good, safe place to ride a bike. This is, I don't know, maybe a 28-foot street, something like that. Parking on both sides creates a narrow travel lane, one direction, narrow travel lane. And so cars naturally go slow. You know, we spend a lot of money in Madison, probably you spend a lot of money in Milwaukee, on traffic calming, right? You're trying to screw up traffic, like the little barriers and, you know, humps and stuff like that. Well, this is natural traffic calming. The travel lane is narrow. And so, you know, the posted speed limit means nothing, right? People will drive as fast as they feel comfortable. I find myself doing that. So when I'm on a very wide street with a very wide vista, I tend to drive faster. When I'm in a narrow, closed place, I'm going to drive slower. It's as simple as that. And so it's not anti-car. You can drive your car here. As a matter of fact, there's room to park 2 cars in front of every house. There's an alley, so they've all got garages. So each one of these lots could accommodate 3 cars. I guarantee you nobody in this neighborhood has 3 cars. My grandparents never owned a car at all because it's not necessary, because you've got other options. You've also got the kinds of densities that will support more frequent mass transit service. So I'm not sure what it is. I used to ride the 54 Mitchell-Burnham, which wasn't too far from here. I'm not sure what the head times are these days, but certainly the density of population can justify more frequent mass transit service. So it works almost equally well for 4 kinds of transportation. You can drive, you can walk, you can ride your bike, you can take mass transit. You know, contrast that to a lot of neighborhoods that we've built since, which really demand that you drive. There's no meaningful alternative. It doesn't feel safe to ride your bike. There's no meaningful destination in walking distance. The lots are too big to justify mass transit service, and so you almost have to drive. My parents lived in such a neighborhood in West Dallas, and that's not even, you know, comparatively, that's a relatively dense neighborhood. But it was basically an auto-dependent neighborhood in West Dallas. Today, they're in an assisted living facility, and one of the reasons they're there is because my dad lost his ability to drive because of Parkinson's. If the neighborhood had been set up differently, they might still be in their own home. And so that's something we've got to think about with 77 million of us in the baby boom generation just getting older. So I'm going to finish with that thought. Thank you very much.